Welcome to the latest episode of Season 4 of the Digital Adoption Show, your go to podcast for cutting edge insights and innovative strategies in today's dynamic work environment. I'm your host, Mayank Arora, Senior Customer Success Manager at Whatfix. Today, we are looking at proven strategies HR leaders can use to drive successful hybrid teams. Joining us today is Sally Loftis, a distinguished human resources consultant who specializes in organization development and social justice. With a master's degree from Pepperdine University, Sally has focused her expansive career on promoting pay equity and crafting workplaces where everyone feels valued and connected. Sally leads Loftus Partners, where her work spans racial and pay equity, appreciative inquiry, and leveraging human strengths to foster healthier organizational environments. She has partnered with a diverse range of organizations, from Fortune 50 companies to small boutique firms and nonprofit organizations across multiple continents, striving to create a lasting impact. Her education to equity and justice extends to her public speaking engagements as well, including numerous podcasts just like this one, where she discusses crucial topics like pay transparency and systemic inequality. Sally's hands on approach and unwavering commitment to continue to influence the broader landscape of human resources and social justice. Welcome to our podcast, Sally. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much. It's funny, I hear that bio and I'm like, who is that person? But it's me. So thank you.
Absolutely. And before we dive into our serious discussion, we want to get to know the real Sally behind the multifaceted leader we know today.
Mhm.
Hence, we have a sweet little segment called the Digital Pulse. This is where we try to get candid with our guests and understand what really drives them. So, Sally, is there a passion outside of work that is particularly close to your heart?
Ooh, love, I will say, being a parent is a huge passion for me. I also love reading and writing. So anytime I can kind of absorb information or create content around it, I get excited. And I love being with my friends.
Interesting. And since you said you like to consume information, do you listen to podcasts as well?
Oh, yeah. My family has a joke that I start most sentences with, "Today I heard on a podcast," because I have like been a podcast person for a good 10 years. And so, yeah, consistently.
Well, high five on that. I sometimes
Thanks.
I feel, once I get to that threshold of 10 years, I would probably start doing that as well. But yes, either way, we have a fun round that we proudly call Triple Strike, where we ask our guests some fun rapid fire questions, and they need to answer without thinking too much. Spontaneity we love in this round. Are you ready to be Triple Strike, Sally?
Yes.
Okay, so here's my first question. If you had to train a team of animals to lead an organization, what would be your top three picks and why?
Oh my goodness, I love animals. So just picking three is going to be tough. Okay, I'm going to go number one with my dog, who's a Shepadoodle. I would call him my emotional support consultant or coach. I'm going to go with two, like a chimpanzee, because they're really smart and can do a lot of things humans can do. And then three, I might go with like a peregrine falcon, right? Isn't that what they're called? The fastest bird in the world, because like if I need something done really quickly, like the falcon can go get it.
Interesting take on that, Sally. And I totally second with you when you said, your dog is your emotional support. I'll give a shout out to Sherry, who is one of mine. So so yes. Anyway, here's my next question. If they
Okay.
ever made a movie on your life and seems like you're on that path, who would be the main lead?
I would probably want Kate Winslet to be the lead, more so because she's about the same age, but she can also bring a lot of depth to a role, and I feel like that would be required.
Excellent choice. And, incidentally, Titanic was my first ever Hollywood movie that I watched as a child. So, so yes,
Nice.
perfect. And here's my last question since we are on triple strike. If a genie offered to make you an expert in a field overnight, which field would you choose?
I'm going to go with a technical skill on this one, and not like technology, but like I'm going to go with roller skating as my expertise because I think it's it can be an outdoor activity that is just fun. And like I would love to be able to roller skate and not be too concerned about falling down and injuring myself.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. I broke my knee when I was 13 and I tried my hand.
Oh no, exactly. You know what I'm talking about then.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, that was fun. And now I'm going to move to a little bit serious part of our discussion today. So before we start and talk about some of the questions, Sally, we would like to know more about you, your corporate journey, the idea behind starting a 100% women-owned human resource consulting firm.
Yeah, I have had a career for almost the last 30 years in human resources, and I started out, that was my major in college, and really because I really enjoyed business, but I really enjoyed working with people, and I thought it was human resources was a great marriage of those passions. And so I've worked in different, corporate environments with boutique consulting firms, nonprofits. I've worked as kind of a freelancer, in those different ways. And so I have, typically always worked on the strategy side of human resources, more kind of at the leadership level and really connecting how people, are the ones who achieve the business objectives, right, and bring success. So at the end of 2019, I was actually finishing my graduate degree and had decided it was time to kind of go out on my own. So I decided to start a firm in 2020 because, that's a great time to
Yeah.
start your own firm in the middle of a pandemic. So that got delayed a little bit, but I still started later in August 2020. And what I appreciate is that I was already very comfortable working virtually. My graduate program had, we had trained in that. I'd had previous roles where I had teams all over the country. So I felt very comfortable with that. And so now I work with a lot of organizations, typically small to medium sized, on their people strategy. And a lot of times connected to it is their pay strategy, as so much has changed in the last few years around our pay models.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Well, that's good. And I know that recently I've seen that trend, and unfortunately, I can never get a job at Loftis Partners. But
I do employ other genders, but just it's a woman-owned business. So maybe not ownership.
got it. Got it. Great. Now, when we were researching about this particular discussion today, we had a lot of ideas we wanted to discuss with you, but it felt it's high time we discuss the big elephant in the HR room, the hybrid work model. To start the discussion off, do you think this model is here to stay, or is it a fad which will eventually die down? It's been pandemic, it's been 5 years. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the hybrid work model obviously existed in some forms before the pandemic. So it's not a new model, it's just that more people were kind of forced into it, right? And I think right now, there are definitely some companies who are trying to bring people back to work. Not, in the office 5 days a week, that's not going so well. So I do think it's going to be a model that all organizations need to offer and use. How they do that is going to vary. And then I do think people's appetite for the office may change over time, right? Like in 5 years, if we don't have another pandemic, depending on what's going on in the world, people may want to go back to the office. I don't know. There's a lot of instability in that part of the market right now. So I'm not sure how that's going to fall out in 5 to 10 years, but it's definitely hybrid model is here to stay.
Got it. And while working around the hypothesis of whether hybrid teams are doomed or destined for success,
Mhm.
can you
Mm.
share some benefits of adopting a hybrid model for organizations? And on the other hand, what are some of the most common challenges you face when you manage a hybrid team, and how do you address those?
Yeah, those are two really big questions. So let me just kind of talk about the model in general. I think that the word you're using is correct, model, because you really need to think of it as a framework and a strategy around talent, the people who work there, and you're doing hybrid because it's a benefit. right, to your employees. And so how you administer and manage in a hybrid world is very different because it's not the same as if somebody's sitting in the office next to you, right? And even as you have people who sit in the office next to you, if you're in there, and people virtually that may be states or countries away, you can't use a one size fits all supervisory approach. So you've got to kind of figure out what that looks like so that you're still promoting kind of equality in those practices. Example being, the person in the office is not necessarily getting more access, right, to senior leaders than hybrid people. I think also from an organizational standpoint, you have to really think through how you gather and communicate with staff. So there are some, like for instance, there are some organizations who do like a hybrid model, and it may be that, let's use it in the United States example, everybody's hybrid, but they have to live within maybe a 100-mile radius of the headquarters, and they fly everybody in once a quarter,
Yes.
for an event or something like that. So there's a lot of different flavors out there of the hybrid model, and you've got to kind of figure out what works and that it is an approach for keeping talent. The challenges on the flip side are when you don't have a strategy, right? When you're just kind of reacting, because then your supervisors are not informed on how to manage people appropriately. And there's a sense of exclusion that people can feel in the hybrid model because because maybe they are, just kind of thrown up on a screen, and there's no intention in a meeting of like talking with the person on the screen or something with a group of people in person. So it's really, I see more exclusion, which would lead to a lack of employee engagement whenever hybrid models are not managed well.
Well, that brings me to my next question. When we are talking about managing any kind of team drill, any kind of team, it drills down to effective team performance, right? You have to see what works,
Mhm.
what doesn't. So how can HR leaders measure and maintain high performance in a hybrid setup? And what are some of the metrics or indicators that are most useful when we are looking at this approach?
Yeah, a couple of things I would throw out there is one is how, whoever is the team leader or supervisor, how you manage people. It's really important. They say about 30% of your time should be spent kind of managing people. And a lot of times you're like, wow, that's a lot. That's like 12 hours a week, right? And you don't want to be a micromanager. But what does that look like? It looks like checking in with people one-on-one, building connection. You have to be a lot more explicit in building connection and team building these days, having meetings with your employees and hearing about what's going on, and having meetings where you can surface issues, challenges, successes, so that you can perform better as a team. And then, so those are kind of a couple of things, is like really the supervisor piece of it is really being intentional about that. I think also, remind me of your second question again.
Yes, my second question was, what are some of the metrics or indicators you feel that are
The
most
metrics.
useful? Because
Yeah.
you can't, tell progress on something that you can't measure. So, uh,
Yeah.
we think,
I mean, team metrics, obviously every organization has team metrics that are
right.
different. I think if I'm leading a hybrid a hybrid team, one is, are people able to complete their work? Am I seeing collaboration happening between my team, like building relationships between the team? How is the team operating outside of our group, like with other departments, things like that? I think it's really about focusing more on team performance than individual performance at that standpoint. And then kind of, so those are some of the leading indicators. I think lagging indicators are people staying in their jobs? What are they saying in employee feedback? Are they happy with the jobs they are doing? Do they understand how to do their work and do it well? Are there opportunities to grow? Those are some of the more lagging indicators.
Understood. And when we are working with hybrid teams, one major challenge we've identified is ensuring effective communication, because that's was also center point of what you're talking
Mhm.
about. So, do you have any tips how to create that kind of environment where we can foster open dialogue to reduce conflict?
Wow, we could spend hours talking about that, right? I mean, there's really a lot of it. So again, I kind of use the theory of like individual, team, department, organization of one, you know, are there strong relationships between the individuals on the team? Just looking at the team, if we're saying a hybrid team, what are creating a set of working agreements that you use and have agreed upon together, and how, who facilitates meetings? How do you share information? How do you make decisions? Things like that. So you're all working on the same set of assumptions is really important, and updating those as your team evolves and or as new people join the team, because they may bring different skill sets that you didn't have before. So I think one is that. I think also being okay with dissent, right? There's, it feels like, in the world now, there's either like we don't talk about dissent, or dissent becomes like a huge thing, right? And it's really not necessarily, those two extremes. There's a lot in between there. So, ways that you can bring dissent is, modeling it yourself, of being like, I don't really understand this, or here's what I'm let me kind of challenge you on this, or, having some phrases, giving people phrases on how to dissent an opinion is helpful. Recognizing when that happens in the group. So, if you're having a discussion, being like, hey, I really appreciate that, some of these differing opinions came out, we're going to make a better decision as a result of it. I think also there's a willingness, you have to have a willingness for your team to fail, because that brings innovation, right? And so people, whenever they are fearful of dissent, they're not going to be as innovative. So you've got to have some places where people can try things, even if maybe you disagree, and see how it goes, because you're truly going to be a stronger team for it.
True. And in fact, a lot of that, the way people communicate within, their organization comes from the company culture, right? So,
Mhm.
so I wanted to understand what are some of the strategies that HR leaders can employ to build a strong and cohesive company culture in a hybrid environment. And as per you, how important is company culture to the success of hybrid teams?
Wow. Well, that's another hours long conversation, right? Let me kind of, when we talk about organizational culture, I typically use Edgar Schein's definition, which is around kind of artifacts, underlying assumptions, and espousing values. So artifacts being like, what can you see and hear, and experience with your five senses? So if I walk into your office space, what am I going to learn about the organization from that, right? Or if I observe a team working together, what am I going to learn by being in person with that group or in a hybrid meeting? Espoused values are typically whatever the core values are of the organization, or basic behaviors. What do we say, who we are, and how we act, and how we show up to work? I work with a lot of organizations right now on updating that, because typically those are laid out more often as like a set of core values, but like in the employee handbook, it's typically like code of conduct. Here are all the things you could do to get fired. So typically I'm working with clients to, if we're working on handbooks, updating with like things like how we show up. Like these are the positive behaviors. This is what this looks like, not just the negative behaviors. And so making sure that aligns with what those values are. And then kind of the underlying assumptions are really the things that are, not said, but that happen. Like, you work for what fix when this happens, right? Or, this is a organization meeting when this happens. So really that's the deeper work in the culture, and that's the stuff that's happening between people and on teams and between teams. And that's why building connection and trust is so important, because to your point earlier around dissent, and conflict, is like you're able to call out and be like, this is what we say, but this is not what we're doing, and it's not a huge personal thing, right? So culture is built of those, and it's not just something you build and let go. Culture is continuously something you're monitoring, you're building. It's changing because the people who work there, are changing in and out, and also how the organization evolves over time is changing. So it's very much a living organism that needs to be nurtured.
True. And I absolutely second that. And one thing I've seen is a lot of big tech companies, they follow leadership principles, and most of them say,
Hmm.
we've defined that much, much later in our journey as a company, but we were already practicing that. And I think practicing is the key. Now, speaking of leadership, a successful team is only as successful as its manager, right? So what type of training should managers receive to effectively lead hybrid teams? And are there any new skills that they need to develop compared to managing
Mhm.
traditional teams like we used to see? And since you've had a
Mhm.
career, so what are your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, definitely the nature of the supervisor position is changing. I actually wrote something recently about like supervisor unicorn, right? Does that exist? Because how we manage now is very different than 5 years ago. And when you throw it into a hybrid environment, again, it gets a little more complex, right? Because you do have people, you may be in the same office as some other people, you may not, there's a lot of different ways. So I think the couple of things, this is not necessarily a training thing, but I think managers need to just check their assumptions of what they think people know and expect at work, and then try to just be very explicit with your expectations. Like the team agreements, or like maybe a one pager on, when you're working for me, these are kind of my things I expect from people, that reaffirm maybe some things that are in the handbook, or reaffirm the culture of the organization, or reaffirm just specifically that supervisor's, particular way of leading. The training, I think, is really important right now for supervisors, which I don't think is a traditional training that they receive, is facilitation. Because whenever you are looking at facilitating a team where you're trying to build autonomy and trust, it means you have less control over the meeting. So you're really facilitating a group dialogue. And your role is kind of building a container where people can have the conversations that are needed to move their work forward. And that is a different skill than kind of the traditional command and control, like, vision of leadership that's been in the past of like, I tell you what to do, I lead every meeting, and you go do it. Facilitation really opens up more of a group experience that people are craving right now.
Got it. And since I was talking about, I listened to a lot of podcasts. One thing that I recently noticed, that when we talk about leadership with top CEOs of the world, what they say is that today my job is just to ensure I'm connecting the right person to the right opportunity. And that's it. And
Mhm,
and then I take a step
mhm,
back. And
mhm.
sometimes losing control actually means having more control over the outcome. So yes, totally second what you said. And it's truly been an interesting conversation, Sally. But before you leave, can you give us three top of the mind effective strategies for developing, leading a highly successful hybrid team? Piggybacking on what you were saying just now.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity of that. I will say number one, it's really important to be able to build individual relationships with your team members. I'm not saying you got to be best friends with everybody, right? I'm not saying you got to like the way they do their stuff, but I mean, having regular communication that's not just, have you done this or what's going on, but like actually building, personal connection with your team members is super important. I think number two is having that set of team agreements, right? Of building, having a conversation as a team saying, how do we want to work? How do we, want to communicate? How do we want to get information flowing? So I think that's a really critical portion. And then I think probably quarterly, it's important to have what I think some Scrum masters would call a retrospective meeting, of really, like, as a team, do a team retrospective meeting. Like, what have we been doing well over the last few months? Where could we improve? How might we want to change for the future? So it could be that, hey, this particular client we worked with, we probably should have asked this one question sooner in the process than later. And so if you're in a regular practice of that, to kind of what we were talking about earlier about, conflict and dialogue, it's a regular practice that you can bring into the space, this retrospective of like, this is what we did well, what we didn't. And it kind of, encourages people to be in that thinking space, for the benefit of the team, and it not be necessarily a personal situation.
Understood. And I really like the idea where you mentioned having a team retrospective, because we've seen that concept in software cycle for far longer than people actually thinking about implementing it in change
Hmm.
management and organization development. But I think that was all, and I must say I really had one of the most fun and interesting conversations by far. And
Well,
before we
thank you.
totally, and no worries. And we hope to host you again, maybe sometime. And before we go, to our listeners, please tune into the Digital Adoption Show across platforms to listen to more interesting, intriguing, and fun conversations with some of the top minds across the digital space, just like Sally. And we are available on Apple, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. Whether you're at home or on the go, don't miss out on our latest episodes. Thank you again, Sally, for being a part of this episode. We wish you all the best. I'm your host, Mayank, signing off.